All right, now we've been so hyper local here, talking about Burrow through sort of this lens of the Bengals and all these minute details that we get in. I wanted to have a voice that takes us to a little bit broader quarterback view across the league, which quarterback play has never been at a higher level. It's fascinating the developments that's happening in the game, and Burrow being a big part of that. So I'm bringing in from the Athletic Football Show, Derrik Klassen. First of all, welcome to the show. I mean, the show, by the way, is awesome. I hope people also subscribe to the Athletic Football Show as well as the Growler. But good to have you on.
It's great to be here. Great to do another, podcast with one of my. There's so many people who work here at the Athletic that it's like I'm just very slowly trying to get to meet everybody, and this is our first chance, so I feel great.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it, and make sure you check out his work. Also, writing for us, and the show is awesome. You've probably already heard him with Robert, but I wanted to talk about Burrow. How do when you view his game from afar, um, what has stood out to you most about him this season, in particular? How he's maybe evolved a little bit in 2024 from his previous self.
In terms of evolved, I would say for me, it's his ability to and willingness really to throw the middle of the field. Because
Yeah,
this was a complaint I had with Joe Burrow for most of his career is that that's just not an area that he would throw all that willingly. And, he would maybe have one throw a game where he just pins a dig route on Jamar Chase and people would be like, see, he can do it. I'm like, I know he can do it. He just does it less than the other guys. And that was always a complaint that I had. But this year, that's just not been the case, just in terms of, I even looked this up on True Media on throws between the numbers 11 to 20 yards. So just that middle of the field box. He has the fifth most attempts in the league, or maybe it was fourth most attempts in the league to that area, which like he was never in the top half in like any other season. And so I think just for him to unlock that part of his game, and part of that too is I think, they've done a better job of getting Jamar Chase in the slot. And so I think he's been more comfortable throwing some of those stuff. But you just even think of some of Burrow's biggest plays this year, some of those dig routes he's hitting to Chase, where Chase just catches it and he's gone for 60 yards. It's unlocked something I think a little bit different in the offense. And so I would say that. And then I think his sack avoidance has gone from like, I think he was always a guy who was tough to bring down, but he would maybe just continue to hold the ball a little bit too long or be a little bit too pat in the pocket, a little bit too anchored to it. Now I think he's done such a good job of knowing when to leave, always shaking guys off. He's really decisive as a scrambler now. He's taken that from like A- to A+. So I think those are probably the two areas where I think he's really taken a step this year.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that middle of the field stuff, because that's something, I wrote a big piece on Jamar Chase a couple of weeks ago, kind of focusing on them getting him into that area. But so much of that has been Burrow's willingness to find him in that area as the other side of it too. And it's like, it really has. I mean, it's changed everything they are able to do with Jamar, and so many more explosive plays. I mean, so many of their explosive plays have come in that window, and getting Chase into a different place where you see how dangerous he is catching it on the run, not just catching, too often they were using him behind the line of scrimmage and just throwing those little bubbles to him all the time. And yeah, it's great. He can take those and break them, but when you get him already in the middle of the field, he's super dangerous. Where do you rank Burrow right now? I'm curious, just because, you know, you see he's such an interesting test case this year because the team is struggling, but his level of play is high. Where are you ranking him right now if you were picking quarterbacks today, to go out there and play a game for you?
I'm going to take the coward's way out here a little bit and say that generally to me, quarterback tiers are always fluid, right? Like guys within a tier, I think can kind of jump around. I think to me, the top three is pretty much always going to be Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. Like that to me is kind of its own thing. Then I think after that, you get into Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Matthew Stafford, I think when he's playing at his best. Jordan Love to me, I think is also in this tier. I think he's a fantastic player. So I think Burrow is probably in that like 4 to 8 tier. And right now he's playing at the top of it. Like I think he's playing better than Matthew Stafford has for most of this year. I think he's been more consistent than Jordan Love has for most of this year. I think he's been more consistent even than CJ Stroud for a lot of this year. He was probably another guy kind of in that tier. So I guess that leaves Burrow at like quarterback 5, then quarterback 4 or 5, depending on how you feel about Herbert. And I personally prefer Herbert just because he's built like a cyborg. But yeah, I would say like 4 or 5.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, you some of the numbers, they put so much on Burrow. It ends up being hard, and a lot of teams do. I mean, you look what Josh Allen's doing. I mean, sometimes he felt like he's just literally just carrying everyone. But I mean, they put so much on Burrow in terms of the volume they throw with and what they ask him to do, and some of the lack of some of the other things that are around him, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, that comes into the equation too. I mean, how do you view sort of how quarterbacks respond to that kind of volume, and if that is something you think maybe is eventually hindering Joe, or is it just, hey, more throws for Joe is good for everybody?
I would say that there are only a select few guys who can handle that. Probably only like the 7 or 8 that I listed, and Joe Burrow is obviously one of those guys. I think where I struggle with that with Joe Burrow in terms of like how much they put on him and how much they're just doing gun passing and stuff. I think it's a little bit self-inflicted just because he's not a guy who I think wants to be under center that much. He doesn't want to turn his back all that much. He just doesn't want to make those kinds of throws. So it almost necessitates that the offense has to be a little bit more gun heavy. Your run game is probably going to be a little bit less diverse because of that. So I think some of that issue and some of that burden is kind of self-inflicted just by the way that he wants to play. But if you do it well enough, it doesn't matter, right? Like, think about, like, to me, he actually reminds me a lot of like the mid 2010s Ben Roethlisberger, like before he fell off, where they were just all they did was be in gun and they had 3 receivers on the field and they were throwing it everywhere. And he kind of reminds me a lot of that style of player. And I think he's truthfully even better than Big Ben was at that stage in his career. So again, yeah, it's a little bit self-inflicted, but a lot of players have some degree of limitation on what they do on the offense. It's just a matter of, can you play A+ ball anyway? And Burrow typically finds a way.
What do you see as the way defenses are adjusting to Joe at this point in his career? We always, the joke that Dan Pitcher and some of the staff always makes is, if you want to see how the defense is going to play against us, just don't watch the film, because teams play them so differently than they will play anybody else, just because they present so many different challenges, specifically when T is healthy. So it's like you never quite know exactly what you're going to get. But how do you see defenses adjusting to Joe? And are there any limitations in his game that have shown up through some things that defenses have tried to do to him?
I think a lot of it is, and this kind of goes back to the run game. I think defenses are just allowed to play a lot of too high coverages the way that they want. And I think they're also allowed to kind of, you'll notice teams a lot. Obviously, the Bengals like some of their RPO stuff, some of their screen game off of the RPOs. Teams will just fire the nickel at them like all the time because it's just the way that they are formationally. It's very obvious what they're trying to do at a lot of their gun formations. So I think that is probably the big thing. And you even see, like, the Ravens specifically, Kyle Hamilton a number of times got his hand up on passes where they were trying to do some of those RPO screens at him. So I think that is kind of a problem with the way that they run the offense and something that they're able to attack Joe Burrow with. But to me, I think if they just got a little bit sturdier on the offensive line and the run game was a little bit more of a threat out of the run, it would force teams to get back into some of the single high stuff that, I think we know and love from that. What was it, the 2021 team where they just got go balls on repeat? I think if they could get a little bit more of that, that would be great. But again, I think that goes back to, they just need to fix the offensive line a little bit. And I know they've been trying, and, Mims is a rookie and they've changed that left tackle, but I think they're probably still quite not where they want to be in that regard.
Yeah, there's no doubt there's going to have some questions that need to be answered, specifically at both guard spots at the end of this year, where they've just given up far too much pressure up the middle, which was, the original investment that they made after that Super Bowl season. They were the first two people in the water, the first team in the water to get two names immediately, and it was Ted Karras and Alex Kappa. Solidify the middle, get pass protectors in there that can change their dynamic. And now I think they're finding themselves maybe back in that spot again with interior offensive line getting up there. It's just so important to Burrow and the way he plays. And like you mentioned, his ability to climb the pocket and work the pocket. If you give him space in front of him, he can play downhill, and make some of those plays that have made a big difference. Well, I certainly appreciate your time and your perspective, Derrik. It's been good catching up with you, and I want everybody to make sure you guys are checking in on the Athletic Football Show with Derrik and Robert Mays. They crush it, whether it's on post-game shows or during the week. Great stuff there. As always, thanks for stopping by. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful.
Have a good one.